You all have been remarkable. You've been here all day. It's been quite a good conference. We started the day with John Negroponte, and he came back to join us. And of course, we're all wanting to have a chance to hear Senator John McCain. Just to share with all of you at my table, Ernie Bauer was saying that he travels extensively, of course, through Southeast Asia, and he said in his last trip, he says, my gosh, he said, who are we down to now? I mean, he said to Senator Cohen, who he was with, he said, there's nobody left now in the Senate except John McCain. Well, my experience is that's all you need, actually. And I have to tell you a personal true story. When I was over in the Defense Department, I'd been nominated to be the Deputy Secretary, and there was one senator who had some objections to my nomination. And he said some things on the floor of the Senate that were hurtful, to be perfectly candid. There was only one senator that was willing to go down to the floor of the Senate to confront this senator with the truth, and that was John McCain. I worked for the Democrats. I'm a Republican, actually, but I worked for the Democrats in the Senate, and I was appointed to the Clinton administration. Only one senator went down to defend my reputation, and that was John McCain. And I learned at that moment what it meant when Martin Luther King talked about the content of character, to be judging people by the content of their character. And I learned something about loyalty and honor that day that's been a lesson I'll have for the rest of my life. And so it's an incredible privilege for me to introduce to you tonight this remarkable man who has done so much for this country and for Southeast Asia, the Honorable Senator John McCain.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Thank you very much, John, and thank you for, it's the first time I ever found out you're a Republican. That's incredible. Thank you, John, and thank you. And I went down because I had to the floor of the Senate to defend this good and decent and honorable public servant because it happened to be true. And the reason why I said I didn't know you were a Republican because during your tour in the Senate and in the Pentagon, I didn't know whether you were a Republican or a Democrat or a libertarian or a vegetarian. I only knew that you were dedicated to the national security of this nation. So I would like to say that it's always great to return to CSIS, and I think CSIS is unique in its nonpartisan and informed way that they help us inform America's thinking about the world and our leadership in it. As many of you know, I just returned from Southeast Asia, and before I turn to the topic of this conference, I'd like to offer some brief impressions from my visit to Burma. It was really quite an experience for me because the first time that I'd been allowed to return to the country of Burma or Myanmar, depending on what you want to call it, in 15 years. It's been 15 years since I'd been allowed to return. And it is one indication that this new civilian government could represent a change from the past. Another noteworthy challenge and another noteworthy change was the new capital, Naypyidaw. Massive government buildings, marble-strewn palaces, brand new hotels, 18-lane highways. And the strange thing about it, no one is there. No one is there. I was on this 18-lane highway, and ours was the only car on the road. The buildings were nearly empty. It was a dislocating and I might say even an Orwellian experience. And it certainly was a sad contrast with the crushing poverty in Rangoon. I visited a private AIDS clinic that was overflowing with people, many orphan children who need more care than is available. I went to a service, a place that's run by a former famous Burmese actor and his wife that offers free funerals for departed souls whose families are too poor to provide their loved ones with the dignity of a decent burial. It breaks your heart, and it makes you wish the government would devote similar levels of enthusiasm and resources to the development of their nation as they did with the construction of their capital. Nonetheless, in my meetings with the first Vice President, two speakers of Parliament, they're cursed with not one but two speakers, and others, it was clear that this government wants better relations with the United States. I stressed that my government and I share this aspiration, and that such a feat is not impossible. After all, the United States and Vietnam have improved our relations, which I know a thing or two about. Anything is possible. However, the main point I stressed is that any improvement of relations would need to be built not on talk but on actions by both sides. The United States should be willing to put every aspect of our policy on the table and to make tangible changes that the government in Naypyidaw asks of us. But this can only be done in conjunction with concrete actions on their part, especially those steps called for by the UN Human Rights Council: releasing all prisoners of conscience, providing the Red Cross unfettered access to all prisons, commencing a real process of national reconciliation that involves ethnic and political opposition parties, including the National League for Democracy, and guaranteeing the safety and freedom of movement of Aung San Suu Kyi. I had the opportunity to see the lady on my visit, and the reason I remain hopeful for the Burmese people has a lot to do with her. Yesterday was Aung San Suu Kyi's birthday, and she expressed this hope, and I quote, "If I were asked what I would wish on my birthday, I wish for peace, stability, and prosperity in the country." This amazing lady remains an inspiration to her people and to me. And I agree with her that this is not the time for the United States to lift sanctions. We should also work to establish a UN Commission of Inquiry, which has nothing to do with retribution and everything to do with truth and justice for the Burmese people. From Burma, I went to Singapore for the Shangri-La Dialogue, where one of the main topics of discussion was the subject of this conference: maritime security in the South China Sea. This issue inspires intense emotions among the states with competing claims to these waters and territories, as I know you've covered today. And the circle of experts who truly understand the historical and legal intricacies of these claims is rather small. I'm from Arizona, where we know how complex it can be to fight over water and land use. I'm also an old Navy man who has spent much of my life traveling and working on security issues in the Asia-Pacific region. And I am increasingly concerned, as you are, that the South China Sea is becoming a flashpoint. The past few years have seen a rapid escalation of tension between these states in this volatile and disputed maritime region. I need not review all of those incidents for this audience. Of course, it is important for all parties to practice restraint, and to be sure, our ASEAN partners will need to make compromises, especially among one another, to reach a peaceful and mutually beneficial outcome, as many of them will acknowledge. That said, this situation needs a little straight talk. One of the main forces exacerbating tensions in the South China Sea and making a peaceful resolution of these disputes harder to achieve is the aggressive behavior of China and the unsubstantiated territorial claims that it seeks to advance. I take no pleasure in saying this. I believe one of the foremost U.S. national interests is the maintenance and enhancement of productive relations with China. I want China to succeed and to develop peacefully, and I believe there's no force in history that condemns our countries to conflict. Indeed, the scope of our global cooperation is broader than ever before, including on issues of maritime security, which is plain for all to see in our common operations off the Horn of Africa. What troubles me, and I'm sure many of you, are the expansive claims that China makes in the South China Sea, the rationale offered for these claims, which has no basis in international law and the increasingly assertive actions that China is taking to enforce its self-described rights, including in waters within 200 miles off the coast of ASEAN countries, as was the case recently in separate incidents involving Vietnam and the Philippines. China's so-called 9 dotted lines map claims all of the islands in the South China Sea as sovereign Chinese territory, and all of their territorial waters as China's exclusive economic zone. Furthermore, certain Chinese interpretations of international law would erode the long-standing principle of freedom of navigation, twisting it from a concept of inclusion that fosters open access to a concept of exclusion that would restrict access. Some in China are even referring to this doctrine as, quote, legal warfare. Why should this matter to the United States of America? This is a question that many Americans will ask, especially when we are committed to 3 conflicts already and when our national debt has literally become unsustainable. Why should America care about the maritime disputes of foreign nations half a world away? There are certainly economic reasons for remaining engaged. The South China Sea region is an important source of jobs and natural resources that benefit many Americans. However, perhaps the larger consideration is the strategic one. The world's geopolitical center of gravity is shifting to the Asia-Pacific region, a region in which many states are rising at once in wealth and power. This creates friction between them where old disputes remain unresolved. The United States has a national security interest in maintaining a favorable strategic balance in this vital region. And central to that is defending the universal freedom of navigation and open access to the seas as a foundational principle of the international order. Efforts to deny freedom of navigation in the South China Sea pose a serious challenge to the rules-based international order that the United States and our allies have sustained over many decades. If these efforts were to succeed, if persistent bullying enabled one state to impose its territorial claims by force and to turn the South China Sea into a virtual no-go zone for the commercial and military vessels of other nations, including the United States, the effects would be dire. It could set a dangerous precedent for weakening international law in ways that ill-intentioned actors would no doubt apply elsewhere. It could create a troubling incentive for rising powers everywhere to take by force what peaceful legal means cannot secure for them. And it would bring us closer to a day when the U.S. Navy judges that it can no longer safely access and operate in the Western Pacific.